Hello and welcome, my name is Savannah and today we're going to be delving into the family lineage of the iconic bag-beating old crone, Miss Agnes Crumplebottom. The Crumplebottoms are an affluent and somewhat prominent family in Sim Nation, perhaps not as prominent and influential as families like the Goths and the Landgrab, but the family are by no means nobodies. They are most certainly very well known. In the Sims 2 university world, Sim State University, there is a street named Crumplebottom Drive, presumably after the family, and you don't just name any street after just any family. Additionally, the Crumplebottoms were also briefly mentioned in The Sims Medieval. Bards can perform a dance called the Crumplebottom Waltz, indicating the family's influence in Sim Nation goes back hundreds of years. So who makes up this influential family? Before we dive in though, let's give some context for how we're going to look at this family. We'll be talking about each individual Sim in the family, following the chronology of the Sims lore when talking about their lives. By that I mean I'll start off with their appearance in The Sims 3 first, and that is because the events of The Sims 3 take place 25 years before the events of The Sims 1, which take place 25 years before the events of The Sims 2. If that doesn't make any sense right now, don't worry, you'll catch on really quickly. But without further ado, let's load into the Crumplebottom household. The oldest known members of the Crumplebottom family are Simon and Prudence Crumplebottom. Simon is already deceased and is buried in the Goth family graveyard in Sunset Valley, the world that shipped with the Sims 3 base game. If you want to watch a deep dive into the lore and families of Sunset Valley, please check out my last video. Anyway, the Goth family graveyard is a graveyard on the Goth Manor home lot. If you're wondering why on earth the Crumplebottoms are buried in the home of the Goths, don't worry, you'll understand a little bit later. Simon died of old age and his traits were frugal, family-oriented, neat, good, and coward. His lifetime wish was to be swimming in cash, which unfortunately he did not complete. Now in The Sims 1, he was not featured or mentioned as in the timeline of real life. His first appearance in the Sims franchise was in The Sims 2. In The Sims 2, he's still dead, of course, as it takes place 50 years after The Sims 3. He's buried in the New Goth family graveyard at the New Goth Manor in Pleasant View, which is one of the 3 base game worlds that shipped with The Sims 2. His star sign was Sagittarius, and his aspiration was knowledge. These were his personality traits, and here are his interests. Prudence Crumplebottom was Simon's wife. She too is deceased in The Sims 3 and buried in the Goth family graveyard. She died of old age and her traits were good, genius, loves the outdoors, coward, and family-oriented. Her lifetime wishes to be a world-renowned surgeon, which unfortunately she did not complete. Like her husband, she was not in The Sims 1. In The Sims 2, she is of course still dead. However, strangely, her tombstone is not in the Goth family graveyard in Pleasant View. In fact, it is literally nowhere to be found. It is possible and probably likely that this was a mistake made by the developers. However, it's also possible that her tomb was destroyed in a fire that may have burned down Goth Manor, specifically the Goth Manor from The Sims 1 neighborhood one. Technically, as I said, she and her husband were not featured or named in The Sims 1. However, on the Goth Manor lot, there were 8 tombstones, and 2 of them were named Grandma and Grandpa, which could possibly be referring to her and Simon, as they are the grandparents of Mortimer Goth, which I will get more into a bit later. This is just speculation though, as they could also be Bella Goth's grandparents or Mortimer's grandparents on his father's side. Talk more about the alleged fire at Goth Manor a bit later as well. Prudence's star sign was Sagittarius, and her aspiration was knowledge. These were her personality traits, and these were her interests. The pair, Simon and Prudence, had 2 daughters named Cornelia and Agnes. Cornelia is the older of the 2 sisters, and in The Sims 3 she's an adult and is married to Gunther Goth and resides at Goth Manor in Sunset Valley. This is why her parents, Simon and Prudence, are buried in the Goth family graveyard. She and Gunther have a child named Mortimer, and she's a stay-at-home mom. Her traits are charismatic, grumpy, neat, perfectionist, and unflirty, and her lifetime wish is to have the perfect garden. In The Sims 1, she resides in Old Town, which is a neighborhood that came with The Sims Unleashed expansion, and the town was actually founded by her husband Gunther. It is also mentioned in her bio that she founded something called the Sim City Bridge Society. I couldn't really find much information on what exactly that was, but I think it has something to do with tea, but I'm not too sure. She still lives with her husband Gunther, and the 2 live with their 2 cats, Menelaus and Hecuba. Her star sign is Virgo, and her son Mortimer now lives with his wife Bella and their daughter Cassandra. In The Sims 2, she is dead and appears to have died in a fire. Interestingly, her husband Gunther also died in a fire, but a separate one that occurred for the one that killed her. Remember that fire at Goth Manor I told you about earlier? So this fire is only speculated to have occurred because in The Sims 2, Mortimer Goth appears to have memories of some sort of fire, as he has memories depicting fire and burned food. This would explain why Goth Manor in The Sims 2 looks completely different from The Sims 1 Goth Manor, and why Prudence's grave is gone. It is unclear, however, if the fire related to Mortimer's memories related to Cornelia's death or Gunther's, and also may not be related to either of their deaths, but I find that unlikely. Cornelia and Gunther are both buried in Pleasant View, which, fun fact, Gunther also founded Pleasant View. He seems to have a knack for founding towns for some reason, and they are buried in the New Goth family graveyard at the New Goth Manor. Her star sign is Pisces, which is strange because it is Virgo in The Sims 1, and her aspiration is knowledge. These are her personality traits, and these were her interests. Her son Mortimer now has a son named Alexander, and his wife Bella is missing. And now Agnes is Cornelia's younger sister, who all of us are probably familiar with. In The Sims 3, she's a young adult living in Sunset Valley. She's recently married and widowed as her new husband, Eric Darling, drowned on their honeymoon. She lives in a large, lavish home all by herself, and the home features an unfinished nursery, indicating that the pair were either trying for a baby, planning on trying, or may have even suffered a miscarriage. Eric is buried right outside of her house, which according to her bio has made moving on rather difficult, as his ghost tends to repel prospective suitors. Her traits are hopeless romantic, grumpy, loner, frugal, and bookworm, and her lifetime wish is to be an illustrious author. She's good friends with her older sister Cornelia, but doesn't really have much of a relationship with Gunther or Mortimer. In The Sims 1, she's an elder and becomes the grumpy old lady we all know and kind of love when she isn't harassing young couples by beating them with her purse when they get too lovey-dovey with one another. She was introduced as Miss Crumplebottom in the Sims Hot Date expansion and resides in the downtown neighborhood. She appears to have at some point gotten remarried to a man named Robert, who was a philanthropist and puppeteer. Unfortunately, she was once again widowed when a chandelier fell on him. Her terrible luck in the love department seems to be what makes her so mean and grouchy in her older years. She's an NPC, not a playable sim. Her star sign is Virgo, and she has no children. By The Sims 2, she is dead and buried in the Goth family graveyard in Pleasant View. Her aspiration was knowledge, and these were her personality traits, and these were her interests. She also appears in The Sims 4, which takes place in a different timeline, but I figured I should mention it anyway. She was added as an NPC in The Sims 4 Cottage Living expansion in Crumplebottom Bagley. She owns a gardening stall with her cousin Agatha. She is old, angry, and still beats couples with her bag. Her traits are hot-headed, bookworm, and loner, and her aspiration is freelance botanist, which gives her the collector trait as well. So as the main Crumplebottom family bloodline, there are some extended relatives whose relation to the main bloodline is a bit unclear, but they still carry the Crumplebottom last name. First, we have Mrs. Crumplebottom. Some have mistakenly believed that Mrs. Crumplebottom from The Sims 2 Nightlife was the same sim as Miss Crumplebottom, aka Agnes. However, this is not the case. As mentioned, Agnes is dead in The Sims 2. Mrs. Crumplebottom is likely a distant relative, maybe a cousin, who seems to have chosen to fill in for Agnes as a grumpy, bag-beating old woman. She's an NPC and basically a carbon copy of Agnes in terms of her behavior and appearance. However, in some ways, she's even more prudish. For example, if she sees her sim in their undergarments or a swimsuit, she will berate them until they change. And like Agnes, she has a disdain for couples and public displays of affection. She's a Virgo and her aspiration is family, which might seem a bit strange, but in The Sims 2, aspirations for townies are determined by their zodiac sign. These are her skills, personality, and interests. Also, one funny Easter egg worth mentioning is that if you have The Sims 2 seasons and use the wishing well from the pack to wish for romance and fail, there's a tiny chance she will crawl out of the well and start to berate you. Next, we have the Crumplebottom Sisters, and I'm not talking about Cornelia and Agnes. In Moonlight Falls, the world that comes with The Sims 3 Supernatural, the existing Crumplebottom household. It is unclear how they are related to the main bloodline, but let's just say that they're cousins. The family features 3 sisters, all of whom are witches, and the household is likely based on the 3 sisters from the television show Charmed. These 3 sisters are incredibly different from one another and are seemingly constantly at each other's throats. Why on earth they chose to still live with each other in adulthood is beyond me. Now, Beatrice is the eldest of the 3 sisters that is incredibly dedicated to and passionate about becoming the best, most powerful witch she can be. She hears about becoming a great witch and not much else. As a result, she can come off as rather stuck up and unfriendly. Her traits are loner, bookworm, grumpy, proper, and frugal, and her lifetime wishes to be an alchemy artisan. And despite being the oldest, she is unemployed. Blind is the middle sister and acts as a sort of mediator between her 2 sisters who don't get along very well due to their drastically opposing personalities. She was an ingredient tester in the culinary career, and her lifetime wishes to be the culinary librarian. Her traits are good sense of humor, natural cook, good, easily impressed, and friendly. Yaka is the youngest sister, and she believes that she is the prettiest and most perfect of her sisters, and believes that it's because of this fact the 2 of them have bullied her all her life. She's an incredibly self-absorbed and vain young woman. She's a stagehand in the music career. Her lifetime wishes to be living in the lap of luxury. She is flirty, a night owl, a slob, childish, and has commitment issues. The sisters' parents are unknown, and the fact that they are witches brings forth the question of whether or not the main Crumplebottom bloodline has a little bit of magic hidden in them as well. Lastly, we have Agatha Crumplebottom. She appears to only exist in the Sims 4 timeline, and as mentioned earlier, she runs the garden shop in Crumplebottom Bagley with Agnes, her cousin. She's basically the opposite of Agnes, as she appears to love, and be incredibly friendly. She too is an NPC, and unlike most Sims whose default emotion is fine, her default emotion is playful. Her traits are outgoing, romantic, and snob, and her aspiration is serial romantic, giving her the alluring trait as well. So as the entire Crumplebottom family that we are aware of, you'll probably notice I didn't talk much about Mortimer, Cassandra, and Alexander, even though they're technically Crumplebottom because of Cornelia. However, I chose not to delve into them because I feel like they're more Goth than Crumplebottom, and the Goths are an entirely different can of worms, so open up on another day, and that day is not today. Also, these 2 Sims from my Sims are also technically part of the Crumplebottom family. However, I don't really care for my Sims. I more care about the mainline Sims games, and also I'm not even sure if the My Sims games are canon, so I'm just gonna skip over those guys. Sorry. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like, subscribe, and comment down below what family I should cover next. I'm considering maybe the Calientes, but I'm not too sure. For my next video to celebrate 25 years of The Sims, I think I'm gonna be doing a deep dive into the history of Sim Nation. If that interests you, I hope to see you there. Bye bye!